Welcome everyone to Another World Awaits. I am the Temporal Reader and I am here to talk about Westwood Vibrato, a webtoon released by YLab, written by In-One Yoon and illustrated by Sun-Hee Kim. This series has been around for a few years now, but it was only recently that I started reading it. Originally published in Korean, the English translation of Westwood Vibrato consists of 71 episodes. I read up to episode 34 and decided to go back to the beginning and really dig into the different stories being told. Do a bit of research on the real life events and locations that the stories were set around. And since I don't have any background in music, there were a lot of musical references and terminology that I was unfamiliar with and didn't bother looking up, since I was just reading through the episodes to move the story along. Now, you definitely don't need any knowledge of all these details to understand the core story, but I thought I'd just collate all the information that I gathered during my second read-through and present them in a series of videos, kind of like a reference guide for anyone reading the webtoon. And it goes to show how much research the creators did to present this heartfelt and heartbreaking story. In Westwood Vibrato, each story arc is called a track, like how each song on an album is called a track. So in this first video, I will cover track 1, titled Misty, which consists of the first 2 episodes. Keep in mind that this is not a review or just me retelling the story. I highly recommend you read the webtoon yourself, then come back to this video to see some of the references that the creators use in the story. That's not to say I won't discuss some of my thoughts regarding the story, since these videos are also just me sharing my experience as I read through the series. Let's dive straight in with episode 1, the first part of track 1, Misty. Our story takes place in Cape Town, which is the legislative capital of South Africa. In this second panel, we see Table Mountain, which exists in our real world, a flat-topped mountain and prominent landmark that overlooks the city of Cape Town. When we are introduced to Cornelia at her studio, Westwood Vibrato, it mentions that she is from West Africa. From the episodes that I have read so far, Cornelia's past seems to be a mystery that is slowly revealed throughout the series. While Cornelia is walking along Boulder's Beach, she encounters a penguin that ends up following her back home. Boulder's Beach is actually a popular tourist spot in Cape Town, known for its colony of African penguins. When she arrives home, Cornelia picks up some letters from her mailbox. She then meets Swan Evans, the jazz saxophonist at the center of this first story. Swan notices that Cornelia has a prosthetic leg. How she lost her leg is part of the mystery of Cornelia's past. Notice when Cornelia explains the meaning of the word Han, she says, "I heard it stands for regret or remorse, those types of lingering emotions." She couldn't give a clear definition of Han because it is a Korean term that does not have a direct translation into English. To quote an article that I read explaining what Han is, although Han is considered indefinable, it is often described as an internalized feeling of deep sorrow, resentment, grief, regret, and anger. I will put a link to the article in the description of this video, which I highly recommend you read, because all these emotions that Han describes are very much the recurring themes of the stories in Westwood Vibrato. Mouthpieces are often named after renowned performers who contribute to their designs. The broken saxophone mouthpiece that Swan asks Cornelia to repair is a Brillhart, named after the saxophonist Arnold Brillhart. Cornelia downplays her ability to distinguish thousands of individual tones, telling Swan that she sometimes hears things due to an accident that occurred when she was younger. As a reader trying to piece together who Cornelia is, it can be assumed that the accident she mentions may be related to her missing leg. I guess I'll just have to keep reading to find out. Flashing back to when Swan was studying in New York, He recounts that a college student's death had ignited an anti-war movement. A real-life example of this was the Kent State shootings that occurred on May 4, 1970. This was during the time the United States military forces were fighting in the Vietnam War. Kent State University students involved in a peace rally were fired upon by the Ohio National Guard, which left 4 students dead. These fatal shootings triggered massive outrage on university campuses all across the United States, igniting the anger of student protesters and furthering the anti-war movement. One of Swan's university professors mentions the Long-Thibaud International Competition. In 1943, pianist Marguerite Long and violinist Jacques Thibaud established the Long-Thibaud International Competition for violinists and pianists, which take place each year in Paris. In 2011, in honor of the French soprano Regine Crespin, it was expanded to include singers and renamed the Long-Thibaud Crespin Competition. For many of us, we can identify different instruments by hearing the sounds they produce. So I find it interesting that Swan's professor, who seems to have a background in music, distinguishes instruments not by their sound, but by their tone, telling Swan that by playing the piano, he can express his pure tone, while the saxophone is a vulgar instrument that has an incomplete tone. A fantastic line of dialogue is when the professor further criticizes Swan's choice to play the saxophone. He says to Swan, "There is no other instrument that strikes a chord in people's minds as much. Your life has to be filled with agony and anguish for the audience to be touched by your music." It is a heavy and foreboding statement, but also conveys how music is used as a form of expression, filled with so much emotion that it can carry feelings of sadness and pain to its listeners. Going back to the term Han and the emotions it describes, the article that I mentioned concluded with a definition from the writer's father. It reads, "My father explained that Han is an emotion that words can't capture. You can't feel it by reading someone else's article or essay, but rather by watching films and listening to songs like Arirang, Korea's unofficial national anthem. He said it's the perfect symbol of what Han means to Koreans. If you listen closely to the lyrics, you can hear a mix of Korean emotions: sorrow, joy, yearning." The song Misty is a jazz standard written and performed by pianist Errol Garner. I will put a link to this song in the description of this video, as well as a link to a version of the song played on the saxophone. I've read many comments from other readers suggesting that Westwood Vibrato would be a better reading experience if it had background music. Even so, with the lack of sound, I applaud the writer for choosing to use emotions as a way to carry the music. For a webtoon with so many music references, though we can't hear the music, we can definitely feel it. In episode 2, the artwork and colours depict music in a very creative way. In the scene at the strip club, the stage is lit with pink-coloured lights, creating a very sensual mood. The lights are used as a visual representation of the sensual music coming from the saxophone, and when the song Misty is played, both Swan and Rose are softly bathed in the pink lighting, as if, even in a room full of people, the song is only for the two of them. And as Rose turns and runs away, the song follows her over the edge of the stage to where she falls, the pink light finally fading as her life is lost. Swan had always blamed himself for Rose's death. Him playing Misty literally pushed her off the stage. He had granted her wish by playing that particular song for her on a big stage, just not the way either of them had imagined. When the story returns to the present day, we are shown the framed picture of the word Han. Just as the professor had warned him 30 years earlier, since the day of Rose's death, Swan's life had been filled with agony and anguish. And to really deliver the message home, Cornelia says to Swan, "Hun is an emotion piled up through time, so it can't be defined easily. The emotion inside you, it may be impossible to blow it away." To me, this is exceptional storytelling, how the writer brings the story full circle back to the theme of Hun. In this panel here, we see there is another piece that attaches to the mouthpiece. This is called a ligature, and it holds the reed to the mouthpiece. The scene of Swan's final performance contains a lot of beautiful imagery. The saxophone playing while the scene transitions into Swan's memory of the past. The bright pink leaves carrying music through the air. Swan appearing as his younger self and given a chance to make peace with his biggest regret. All these elements tie together to show that finally, after 30 years, Swan is able to give Rose the performance she had once wished for. Both the artist and writer did a stellar job of constructing this scene. It illustrates that very relatable feeling of wanting to revisit a past situation that you always hoped had played out a different way. That concludes my look at Westwood Vibrato, Track 1, Misty. Thank you for getting to the end of my first video. I know it's a bit rough around the edges, and I'm open to any and all feedback. If you found any of this information interesting, or if there's anything I can improve for my next video, please let me know in the comments. I appreciate that you took a chance to watch my video, and I hope you'll be back when I take a look at track 2 of Westwood Vibrato. Hopefully I can keep this going into the end of the series. Remember to take the time to enjoy what you read, and I'll see you next time.